Welcome back, Stock Explorers. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today, we're looking at Atomera.
Interesting company.
Yeah, they've been generating quite a bit of buzz, especially among, well, investors looking for, that next big thing.
The next big thing, exactly.
Our mission today is to, really break down Atomera, what they do, how they do it, and what the future might look like for them.
And of course, what it all means for investors.
Exactly. So let's dive in, shall we?
Let's do it.
Now, at the heart of Atomera is something called Mears Silicon Technology, or MST as they like to call it.
Right.
And they describe this as, get this, a quantum engineering approach to enhancing semiconductors.
Quantum engineering, huh? Sounds fancy.
Yeah, it does. So let's unpack that a bit. I mean, what does quantum engineering actually mean in this context? And why should investors, the folks listening in, why should they care?
Good questions. So at its most basic level, MST is about making very precise, very tiny changes to silicon at the atomic level.
Okay.
And they do this during the manufacturing process. So you can imagine, they're building these silicon wafers, and within that silicon structure, they're inserting these incredibly thin layers of oxygen.
These layers are how thin exactly?
We're talking just a few atoms thick.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really precise stuff. And the way they do it, this insertion process, is through a technique called epitaxy.
Epitaxy.
Yeah.
Okay. So, in essence, they're adding the special ingredient, these oxygen layers, to the silicon mix.
Precisely.
And this creates a kind of layered structure,
Yes. They call it a superlattice.
a superlattice. And that, in turn, changes how electrons behave within the silicon.
Exactly. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because it's different from the usual way silicon oxide is formed.
Right. Usually silicon oxide is used as a barrier, as an insulator.
Right. It stops the flow of electricity. But MST doesn't create that kind of barrier. Instead, it creates this slight, very subtle disturbance in the arrangement of the silicon atoms.
So it's not a complete roadblock. It's more like smoothing out a few bumps in the road.
Perfect analogy. Think of the electrons as cars on a highway. MST just makes their journey a little bit smoother, less scattering, less resistance.
Okay. I'm starting to get the picture. So this smoother flow of electrons, I imagine that leads to some performance improvements.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, one of the things that really stood out to me in our research is that MST is designed to work with the equipment that chip makers are already using.
Right. They don't need to completely revamp their factories.
Exactly. That's huge.
Huge.
Yeah.
It's a major advantage in terms of adoption. I mean, if companies had to spend billions on new equipment just to use MST, it would be a much tougher sell.
Yeah, it would be a non-starter for many.
Probably. But because it's compatible with existing techniques, specifically reduced pressure epitaxial deposition,
Yeah.
it becomes much more feasible.
So it fits right into their existing workflows.
Pretty much.
Okay. So they've got this technology, this MST, and they have a couple of different ways of implementing it, right?
They do. Two main methods.
Okay. Fill us in.
So the first method is called MST1. And this is what you could call a blanket approach.
Blanket approach?
Yeah. They apply MST across the entire silicon wafer.
I see.
And this is really well suited for those advanced applications. Things like FinFET transistors.
Which are basically the tiny little switches that make our modern processors work.
Right. Exactly. And also for RF SOI technology.
Which is used for things like wireless communication.
Right.
Yeah.
Smartphones, Wi-Fi, that kind of thing.
So MST1, that's for the really high-tech stuff.
Yeah.
Now, what about the other method?
The other method is MST2. And this is a more selective approach.
Okay.
So instead of applying MST everywhere, they use a mask, basically stencil, to apply it only to specific areas of the chip.
I see. So they can target the areas where they need the performance boost.
Precisely. And this makes MST2 very well suited for analog and power devices.
Okay, so they've got these two different approaches, both designed to fit into existing manufacturing processes. That's smart. That's really lowering the barrier to entry.
It is. Makes it a lot easier for chip makers to say yes.
Okay, so let's talk about the benefits. I mean, all this sounds very technical, but what's the real-world impact? What does MST actually do for the performance and the efficiency of chips? Because at the end of the day, that's what matters to investors.
Right. You want to see tangible results.
Exactly. Show me the money.
Well, the numbers are quite impressive. Independent evaluations have shown that MST can lead to a 10 to 20% increase in what's called drive current.
Drive current.
Yeah. Think of it as the strength of a transistor.
Like the horsepower of a car.
Exactly. More drive current means the transistor can switch faster, it can handle more power,
So basically, the chips can do more.
and they can do it quicker,
Hmm.
which translates directly to better performance in the devices we use every day.
Our phones, our laptops, everything.
Everything. And not just that. MST also improves something called carrier mobility.
Carrier mobility, that sounds complicated.
It's basically how easily electrons can move through the silicon,
Oh,
and MST makes that movement smoother. Less resistance.
and this is across different operating conditions.
Yes. So no matter how the chip's being used,
Yeah,
the electrons can flow more freely.
leading to better overall performance.
Precisely.
Okay. Now, in the tech world, power consumption is a huge deal.
Absolutely. It's one of the biggest challenges.
So what does MST bring to the table in terms of efficiency?
This is where it really shines. They've demonstrated over a 60% reduction in what's called gate leakage.
Gate leakage.
Yeah, it's basically wasted electricity within a transistor,
Oh.
like a leaky faucet.
So MST plugs those leaks.
Exactly. So less power is wasted, which means longer battery life for your phone or your laptop.
And lower energy bills for data centers and things like that.
Exactly. So it's good for the environment. It's good for your wallet.
Everyone wins.
It's a win-win.
Now, beyond performance and efficiency, there's also the issue of reliability.
Right. How long these chips last.
Exactly. What does MST do in that area?
Well, MST improves something called gate oxide integrity.
Gate oxide integrity.
Yeah. It's a bit of a mouthful. But basically, the gate oxide is this very thin layer in a transistor,
Okay.
and it acts as an insulator. It's really important. But it can be delicate.
So MST strengthens this gate oxide.
Exactly. Makes it more robust. So the chips are more durable. They can handle higher voltages without breaking down.
So potentially longer lasting chips. That's good news for consumers.
Absolutely. Nobody wants to replace their phone or their laptop every year.
Okay. So MST tackles power consumption, reliability, and it also helps with something called manufacturing variability, right?
It does. They've seen up to a 50% reduction in what's called threshold voltage variability.
Threshold voltage variability. Oh.
Basically, it means that all the chips coming off the production line are more uniform, they perform more consistently.
It's important.
Very important, especially for complex chips, and it also leads to better yields for manufacturers.
Meaning they get more working chips from each batch.
Exactly, which is good for their bottom line.
So MST seems to offer a whole bunch of benefits across the board. Performance, efficiency, reliability, even manufacturing. That's pretty impressive.
It is a versatile technology.
Yeah, it's not just a one-trick pony.
Not at all.
Now, our research suggests that this isn't just limited to one specific type of semiconductor. It seems to have pretty broad applications.
Right. MST can be used to enhance a variety of different chip types.
So let's break those down a bit.
Sure.
Okay, so first up, you have what they call MSTSP, which stands for, I believe, MST for power and analog.
That's right.
So this is specifically targeting chips that are used for things like power management.
Exactly.
And this involves combining the oxygen layers with very precise control over something called doping
Right. Doping is basically adding tiny amounts of other elements into the silicon.
to fine-tune its electrical properties.
Precisely. And in power management ICs and 5V devices, MSTSP has the potential to reduce the die size.
Die size, meaning the physical size of the chip itself.
Right. And a smaller chip means lower manufacturing costs.
Right. Less material, less waste.
Exactly.
And they say they can achieve this size reduction without sacrificing reliability or efficiency.
Which is key.
And they've also demonstrated some impressive improvements in specific on resistance.
Right. This is a critical metric for power switching efficiency.
And they've shown that MSTSP can lead to much lower on resistance compared to standard designs.
Which translates to less energy lost as heat, more efficient power delivery.
So smaller chips, more efficient power delivery, that's a winning combination.
It is.
Now, this MSTSP technology, it's initially focused on 5V devices.
Right.
But the principles behind it, they could be applied to a wider range of power electronics.
That's the idea. The technology has the potential to scale to different voltage levels.
So that opens up a lot of possibilities.
Absolutely.
Okay, moving on. Let's talk about memory, specifically DRAM.
The workhorse of the computing world.
Exactly. How does MST give DRAM a boost?
Well, one of the most significant benefits is the potential to reduce chip size without having to move to a smaller technology node.
Okay, I'm not sure everyone understands what that means.
Right. So basically, to make chips more powerful and more efficient, The industry has been on this constant march towards smaller and smaller transistors.
There's Moore's law.
Exactly. And each shrink, each new generation, is called a technology node.
Oh,
But building the factories to make these smaller chips, these new nodes, is incredibly expensive.
in billions of dollars.
Billions. So if you can find a way to get more memory onto a chip without having to shrink the transistors, that's a huge advantage.
And MST can potentially do that?
Exactly. It offers a way to increase memory density without having to make that costly jump to a new node.
So you can stick with your existing manufacturing processes and still get more memory per chip.
Precisely. And MST can also help optimize the supply voltage to DRAM chips.
Supply voltage.
Right, that's the voltage that powers the chip.
Okay.
And by optimizing that voltage, you can reduce power consumption.
Both when the memory is active and in standby mode.
Correct. Which is crucial for mobile devices.
Right, because battery life is everything.
It is. And it also has a big impact on the energy costs of data centers.
So again, it's about efficiency.
Efficiency is a recurring theme with MST.
It seems to be. Now, what about performance? Does MST actually make DRAM faster?
It does. They've shown some pretty substantial improvements. For example, about a 50% improvement in what's called transconductance.
Transconductance.
Yeah. It's a measure of how well a transistor amplifies a signal.
Okay.
So higher transconductance basically means the memory can respond faster.
Okay. And it also leads to higher drive currents within the memory cells.
Right. Which again translates to faster read and write speeds.
So everything is snappier.
Exactly. And of course, we have that reduction in gate leakage that we talked about earlier.
Right. Less wasted energy.
Yes. So overall, you get faster and more efficient memory.
That's a good combination. Now, all of this sounds very promising, but what about the future? What about the really advanced chips that are being made today? Can MST keep up?
That's a key question. And the answer seems to be yes. MST is designed to be compatible with a wide range of technology nodes.
Meaning it can work with the latest and greatest chips.
Exactly. From the older 180 nanometer processes all the way down to the cutting edge 7 and even 5 nanometer nodes.
So it's not just for legacy technology. It can enhance the most advanced chips being made today.
Precisely. And that's important because as we continue to shrink transistors, it becomes increasingly difficult and expensive to get those performance gains through traditional scaling.
Right. Each new node is more and more challenging.
And more costly.
So MST offers a potential way to get around that.
Right. It's a way to boost performance without needing to do those massive, costly node shrinks.
And they've made some bold claims about how much improvement MST can deliver.
They have. They say MST can enable at least a 15% improvement in what they call PPAC, which stands for power, performance, area, and cost.
Okay, so it's a holistic measure of chip improvement.
Exactly. And they claim that a 15% improvement in PPAC is comparable to what you would get from a full node shrink.
But without the massive cost of a new fab,
Right.
that's a pretty compelling argument.
It is. Now, it's important to note that MST isn't meant to replace other enhancement techniques.
Right. It's not an either situation.
Exactly. It's designed to be additive, so manufacturers can combine MST with things like silicon on insulator.
And strain engineering. So it's like adding another layer of performance on top of what they're already doing.
Precisely.
Okay. Let's talk about how Atomera makes money. Their business model is based on licensing this MST technology.
Correct. It's a tiered licensing model.
Tiered licensing. Okay. Break it down for us.
So the first tier is what they call an integration license.
Integration license.
And this basically allows a potential customer to test out MST.
Kind of like a trial period.
Yeah, exactly. And during this phase, Atomera will usually provide the MST film deposition themselves.
So the customer can focus on integrating it into their processes.
Right.
And then if the customer is happy with the results, they can move on to the next tier.
Which is an R&D license.
Okay.
And this allows the customer to actually install the MST process in their own factory.
For their own internal research and development.
Precisely. So they can really start experimenting with MST and figuring out how to best use it in their products.
And then the final tier, the Holy Grail.
The high volume manufacturing license.
Or HVM license for short.
Right. And this is the big one. This grants the customer the right to actually manufacture and sell chips that incorporate MST.
And this is where Atomera starts making serious money.
Exactly. This is where the royalties come in.
So Atomera gets a cut of every MST-enabled chip that's sold.
That's the core of their revenue model.
Okay. So what do these licenses cost? What are we talking about here?
So the integration license, the initial trial period, that typically costs between $500,000 and $750,000.
Okay.
And that covers a period of 12 to 18 months.
Okay.
And then the royalty arrangements for the HVM license, that usually falls somewhere between 1% and 3% of the chip sales value.
Okay, so it's a percentage of revenue.
Right. And there are often minimum guaranteed royalty payments.
To ensure that Atomera gets at least some revenue, even if sales are slow to start.
Exactly. And there can also be maximums.
So the royalties don't get out of control if the chip becomes a massive hit?
Right.
Okay. So Atomera's success is tied to the success of their licensees.
Absolutely. The more MST-enabled chips that are sold, the more money Atomera makes.
Now, how are they doing on that front? What kind of progress have they made in getting these licensing deals done?
Well, they've had some significant wins. One of the biggest is their partnership with STMicroelectronics.
STMicroelectronics, that's a major player in the semiconductor industry.
One of the biggest.
So that's a big deal.
Huge deal. And they successfully installed the MST process at ST's facility in Italy.
So it's not just talk, it's actually being implemented in a real-world manufacturing setting.
Exactly. And that's a major validation of their technology and their business model.
It's a strong signal to other potential licensees.
Absolutely. If ST Micro is willing to bet on MST, others are more likely to take notice.
Now they've also got to deal with Asahi Kasei Micro Devices.
IKM.
Right.
And this was actually the deal that generated their first license revenue.
Back in 2018.
Right. And AKM is integrating MST into a variety of their devices.
For things like consumer electronics, automotive, and industrial applications.
Right. A broad range of markets.
So we're seeing real-world adoption across different sectors.
We are, and they've indicated that they're in discussions with a number of other companies as well.
So the pipeline is growing.
It seems to be. They've mentioned ongoing discussions with around 19 companies, so there's definitely interest out there. And the ST Micro deal has probably helped to accelerate that.
Makes sense. Now, for a company like Atomera, a company that's built on its technology, protecting that technology is absolutely crucial.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Intellectual property is everything for them.
So what's their IP strategy? How do they protect their inventions?
They've got a pretty robust strategy that combines patents and trade secrets.
Okay, so patents. Everyone understands patents.
Right. Patents are basically legal documents that give you exclusive rights to your invention.
For a limited time.
Right. Usually 20 years.
And as of late 2024, they had over 100 U.S. patents and over 100 international patents.
With many more applications pending.
So they've been busy building up their patent portfolio.
Oh, yeah. And their patent activity has really ramped up since their IPO.
Which was back in 2016.
Correct.
Now, what's interesting is that the focus of their patents has evolved over time.
It has. Initially, their patents were more focused on the fundamental material science of MST.
You know, the basic building blocks of the technology.
Right, but now they're increasingly patenting specific applications of MST.
So how it's used in different types of chips?
Exactly.
Well,
And they're also patenting specific implementation methods.
so not just what it is, but how you actually make it work.
Precisely. So they're protecting both the core technology and how it's used in the real world.
Smart. Now, what about those trade secrets you mentioned? What are those all about?
So the specific recipes for depositing the MST film, the exact details of how they do it, those are protected as trade secrets.
Okay, so it's like the secret sauce.
Exactly. It's the know-how that makes MST work.
Yeah.
And they share this information with their licensees, but under very strict non-disclosure agreements.
So the licensees can't just turn around and give away the secret formula.
Right. And trade secrets can actually offer longer-term protection than patents.
Really?
Yeah, because a patent eventually expires. But a trade secret, as long as it remains a secret, can be protected indefinitely.
So it's a valuable asset for Atomera.
It is. It's what gives them a competitive edge.
Okay. Let's talk financials. What does the financial picture look like for Atomera?
Well, like many early-stage tech companies, they're not profitable yet.
So they're still in the investment phase.
Right. They're spending a lot on R&D.
Trying to perfect their technology and expand its applications.
Exactly. And compared to some of the bigger players in the semiconductor industry, their revenue and earnings are still relatively small.
But they do have a strong cash position.
They do. They've got a good quick ratio, which means they can meet their short-term obligations.
So they've got some breathing room.
They do.
Yeah.
And they've been managing their expenses carefully.
Okay. Now, what are some of the key risks and challenges that Atomera faces?
Well, one of the biggest is simply the nature of the semiconductor industry.
Which is?
It's a very conservative industry.
Okay.
Chip makers are very risk-averse.
It's understandable. I mean, they're dealing with incredibly complex and expensive manufacturing processes.
Exactly. So integrating a new technology like MST, even if it has clear benefits, is a big decision.
There's a lot at stake.
There is. So Atomera has to work hard to overcome that inertia.
To convince chip makers that MST is worth the effort.
Right. And they're doing that by offering flexible integration options and by working closely with potential customers through joint development agreements.
So they're trying to make the adoption process as smooth as possible.
They are. And the ST Micro deal was a big step in that direction.
Proof that MST can be successfully integrated into a real-world manufacturing environment.
Exactly.
Okay. What other challenges do they face?
Well, financial sustainability is always a concern for a company that's not yet profitable.
Right. They need to convert those integration licenses into royalty-generating HVM licenses.
And that's not a guaranteed thing. There are technical hurdles, there are commercial hurdles.
So they're not out of the woods yet.
Not by a long shot.
Right.
And then, of course, there's the constant challenge of protecting their intellectual property.
Especially in such a competitive industry.
Exactly. They need to stay ahead of the curve, they need to keep innovating, and they need to make sure their patents and trade secrets are strong and defensible.
So there are definitely risks involved.
There are, as with any investment.
Okay. So what are some of Atomera's strategies for future growth? How are they planning to overcome these challenges and really scale their business?
Well, one key strategy is to expand the applications of MST.
So not just focusing on power management and memory.
Right. They're looking at new areas like gallium nitride on silicon.
GaN on Si, that's a hot area right now.
Very hot. It's a wide bandgap semiconductor material.
Which basically means it can handle much higher voltages and temperatures than traditional silicon.
Exactly. And it's ideal for things like power electronics.
Electric vehicles, solar inverters, that kind of thing.
Right. And MST can actually help to overcome some of the manufacturing challenges associated with GaN on Si.
Really?
Yeah. For example, one of the big issues with GaN on Si is stress. Yeah. When you grow a layer of GaN on a silicon wafer, it creates stress in the material.
Okay.
And that can lead to defects and warping.
So the wafers can become unusable.
Exactly. But MST can actually relieve that stress.
Really? How does it do that?
It's a bit technical, but basically the MST layers act as a kind of buffer.
Okay.
They distribute the stress more evenly.
So the wafers are less likely to warp or crack.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's crucial for being able to manufacture GaN on Si devices at scale.
And they've got data to back this up.
They do. They've shown that MST can significantly reduce wafer bow.
Wafer bow, meaning how much the wafer bends.
Right. And they've also shown that it can eliminate microcracking.
Which are tiny cracks that can form in the material.
Right. And those cracks can lead to device failure.
So MST makes GaN on Si more manufacturable.
It does.
Yeah.
And it also improves the performance of the devices themselves.
How so?
Well, for one thing, it improves electron mobility.
Meaning the electrons can move more freely through the material.
Exactly. And that leads to higher breakdown voltages.
Which means the devices can handle more power.
Precisely. And MST also reduces gate leakage currents in GaN on Si devices.
So less wasted energy.
Right. And they're working with Sandia National Laboratories to validate these results.
Sandia National Labs, that's a pretty prestigious research institution.
It is.
So they're not just making claims, they're actually doing the research to back them up.
Exactly. They're putting their money where their mouth is.
No. What's the cost advantage of GaN on Si compared to silicon carbide?
Well, silicon carbide is another material that's used for power electronics.
Right, but it's more expensive.
Much more expensive. And it requires specialized manufacturing processes.
So it's not as widely adopted.
Not yet, but GaN on Si has the potential to change that.
Because it can be manufactured on existing silicon production lines.
Exactly, which is a huge advantage. And MST can make that manufacturing process even more efficient and cost-effective.
So it's a game changer. Okay, so what industries stand to benefit the most from these advancements in GaN on Si?
The list is pretty long.
Give us a few examples.
Well, electric vehicles are a big one.
Faster charging, longer range, more efficient power electronics.
Exactly. And then you have data centers.
Which are always looking for ways to reduce their energy consumption.
Right. And GaN-on-Si can help with that.
And then you have things like renewable energy systems.
Solar inverters, wind turbine converters, that sort of thing.
And 5G and 6G communication networks.
And industrial automation.
And even consumer electronics.
Faster, smaller phone chargers.
So the potential is huge.
It is. It really touches on almost every aspect of our modern lives.
So MST isn't just about making incremental improvements to existing technologies. It has the potential to enable entirely new classes of devices.
Exactly. And that's what makes Atomera such an intriguing company to watch.
Absolutely. So for all you stock explorers out there, keep an eye on Atomera. They're definitely a company to follow because they could be on the verge of something big.
They could be.
And if MST lives up to its potential, it could have a major impact on the entire tech industry.
And on the world.
So stay tuned. The story of Atomera is just beginning.
It is.
And we'll be here to cover it every step of the way.
We will.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive.